Good morning sa inyong lahat. Mag-uumpisa tayo in a few minutes. Okay, magandang umaga ulit sa inyong lahat. Ay mag-uumpisa na. Meron ba tayong announcements today? Ralph, Eddie, or Patricia bago tayo magsimula?
Wala naman po.
Wala naman? Okay, so ipagpapatuloy na natin yung pag-uusap natin. Paalala na ang inyong exam ay right after Holy Week. So next week is reading break. So may pahinga ng konti. Sana gamitin nyo rin yung panahon na yon para makapagpahinga, makapag-refresh ng isip at nang sa ganun ay hindi kayo masyadong ma-stress dito sa ating klase. Okay, sige. Magkakaroon tayo ng konting review kasi sa palagay ko mahalaga na tumatak sa inyong isip kung paanong kung ano yung naging lesson natin o naging napag-usapan natin nung nakaraan. Kasi foundation yon doon sa mga susunod nating pag-uusap. Keep in mind na ang pinag-aaralan natin dito sa pangalawang bahagi ng kurso ay tungkol sa firm. So firm theory ito. Na take-off point natin yung nakaraang part ng kurso, ng course, which was about the consumer. So may emphasize lang ako ng konti bago tayo mag-proceed at tapusin itong chapter 8 and then hopefully mag-umpisa na tayo ng chapter 9. Okay, having said that, mag-share screen na ako. Siguro bago ako magsimula, meron bang may gustong itanong quickly bago tayo magpatuloy? Wala sa chat box. Okay, kung meron kayo itatanong, mamaya ano niya na lang, i-blurt out niyo na lang kasi hindi ko nakikita yung chat box kapag nag-share screen ako. Okay. Okay, so konting repaso, no. So itong yung ginawa natin nung nakaraang pagkikita natin ng Huwebes ay upang maipakita sa inyo kung paano natin na-derive yung supply curve. Okay, so and ano ba ang basis ng supply curve? Ang supply curve ay essentially nakabase o nakatuon doon sa cost. No, kasi yun namang desire ng firm kung gaano kadami ang kanyang ipoproduce o kanyang isusupply ay base doon sa magiging cost noong production. Kaya ang pag-aaral natin nakasentro doon sa cost ng firm. This is how we derive the supply curve. Okay, so konting repaso, no? Yung sa bahagi ng curve na tiningnan natin. Oops. Sorry. Na meron doon nakalagay yung shutdown point na tinatawag, merong break-even point, Tapos ibang punto o point or intersection noong cost curve. So may tatlong cost curves tayong tinitingnan, no, relevant doon sa derivation ng supply curve, which is the marginal cost, the average cost, and the average variable cost. At tinatanong siguro ng iba, bakit hindi average, bakit hindi total cost? Actually, total cost yan. Kasi makikita nyo dito sa graph na to, bagamat average cost yan, pag minultiply mo yan sa, pag minultiply mo yung average cost sa quantity, that's total cost, di ba? Kaya, kaya dito, hanap ko lang yung, alright, oops, clear. Kaya, alright. Kaya kapag minultiply nyo, halimbawa itong point na to, halimbawa isang point dito, kita nyo yung binibilugan ko, no? Diyan sa point na yan, what is average cost? This is average cost. This is your average cost for that, no? Lahat ng nandito sa vertical axis, iba-ibang klaseng cost yan. Kaya PHP ang nandyan, ang kanyang unit ay pesos kasi pwedeng average cost, pwedeng marginal cost, pwedeng average variable cost. Basta pesos ang kanyang unit. Dito naman sa horizontal axis ay quantity. So this is in units of goods. So pwedeng itong pieces, pwedeng tons, etc. Okay, now notice kapag ka sa average cost, itong point na to, pag minultiply mo yan dito sa quantity, average cost times quantity is equal to total cost. Why? Because average cost is simply total cost divided by quantity. Yan ang definition natin ng average cost doon sa nakaraan nating pag-aaral. No? So I hope malinaw yan. Ngayon, dito din sa graph na to, makikita natin yung iba-ibang bahagi ng iba-ibang konsepto, yung break-even point at saka shutdown point. Yung break-even point dito sa punto na to. Alright, itong point na yan, yung break-even point na yan yung break-even point. Bakit? Kasi kapag susundan natin yung ating price equals price what is price, no? Bale price, the firm being a price taker, if the price is equal to your average cost, this one, all right, that will be your total cost. Your total cost, but at what is revenue at that time? If price is equal to average cost, at that point, this is also equal to revenue. Kasi if, di ba, kapag price is equal to average cost, it's the same point, yung point na yan. So what is total cost at that point? That would be AC times Q. But what is total revenue? Total revenue is price times quantity. But since price is equal to AC, then these two are the same. So break-even point yan. Alright? Ngayon, ano naman yung shutdown point? By definition ng shutdown point, yan yung punto na kung saan the price is so low that any lower price than that, the firm isn't going to produce anymore because the price isn't enough to generate revenues that will cover at least a portion of the fixed cost. Kaya doon sa shutdown point, hanggang doon lang, kasi di ba sabi natin, hindi porket ang price ay lower than average cost ay hindi na magpo-produce yung firm. Kasi maaaring mas makakatipid pa rin yung firm o makakabawa sa kanyang loss kung mag-produce pa siya kasi he will generate enough revenue to pay for the variable cost and a portion of the fixed cost. Ngayon, kapag masyado nang mababa yung price na even the fixed cost isn't or cannot be covered anymore by the revenue that can be generated from the price, then the firm will not produce anymore lower than, if the price is lower than that shutdown point. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, hanggang dito lang sa point na to, yan na ang final price that the firm is willing to accept. because that price is at the threshold. It is just enough to pay for the average variable cost. All right. Any price lower than that, the average variable cost is no longer, the average variable cost is higher than the price, which means that the average variable cost isn't even covered anymore. So the firm will not agree to produce or to produce if the price were lower than the average variable cost. Okay. So ibig sabihin din yan na if ito na yung shutdown point, then ang relevant lang sa firm as far as production is concerned, as relevant meaning yung set of prices that the firm is willing to make, willing to take, are prices that are higher than this shutdown point. So lahat ito, lahat ng points na nandito, lahat ng prices na nandyan sa above the shutdown point, the firm is willing to accept, which means that if the price were this much, that's the price. Since ang ating equimarginal, ang ating profit maximizing condition is P is equal to MC, but only if it's perfectly competitive. All right. Kasi kapag perfectly competitive, price is equal to MR. Ang totoong condition na sinusundan natin ay MR is equal to MC. Alright? Kaya lang, kapag hindi ito perfectly competitive, kailangan nyo pang computein itong marginal revenue. Kapag naman perfectly competitive na yan, automatic price is equal to MR. Therefore, hindi nyo na kailangan calculating pa yung marginal revenue because you already know that the marginal revenue is equal to price if the firm is a perfectly competitive firm or if the industry is a perfectly competitive industry. Okay? So mabalik tayo dun sa ating pinag-uusapan. Kung lahat ng prices na tatanggapin lang ng firm ay above shutdown point and price is equal to MC, now yun ang quantity, this will lead to the quantity star. Kasi kapag this is the price, let's say that's the price, no? Yan yung price taker share. So price line yan. So at this, how much will the firm produce? It is that the price is equal to MC. Ito yon. Diba? So what is the quantity that corresponds to price is equal to MC? This is the one, Q star. So therefore, if the price were this much, price 1 yan, price 2, let's say this is the price line naman, this is price 2, this is price 1, then ito naman yon, ito naman yung intersection nila, then ito yung Q's double star. Alright? So ibig sabihin, sa bawat price that's offered the firm is going to offer to produce either Q star or Q double star or Q triple star, etc. So any point above the shutdown point is now considered the supply curve. So from here, that is your firm supply curve. So for the individual firm, the supply curve is the marginal cost curve beginning from the shutdown point pataas. Okay? Then how do you calculate or how do you compute for or how do you estimate the industry supply curve? You simply add all of the individual supply curves, individual firm supply curves, and you'll arrive at the industry supply curve. Okay? So just some points to think about also and to remember. The MC curve will hit the AC and the ABC curves at the lowest points of these two curves. And the part of the MC curve from the shutdown point and above the shutdown point is the individual supply curve. And then you simply sum all of the individual supply curves to come up with the industry supply curve. Okay, now, discussion na rin natin to. There's a short run and long run supply curve. Now, kapag the distinction between the two will determine the elasticity. No? Ang long run supply curve, pag sinabi natin the supply curve is elastic, ibig sabihin, when the price increases by 1%, the firm will supply quantity more than 1% elastic. So sensitive siya sa price. Now, in the long run, elastic siya or sensitive siya sa, the firm is sensitive to prices because the time is long enough for the firm to be able to adjust its size of production, to be able to buy equipment, etc. No? Sa short run, masyadong maigsi yung panahon that even if the price were so high, the firm can't take advantage of immediately because it takes some time for the firm to expand its operation. Okay. So conclusion, short-run supply is less elastic than long-run supply. And in the long run, there will be zero economic profit and business will earn normal return on the investment. Ito yata yung huli natin huling point that I made. Bakit sa long run, there's zero economic profit? That doesn't make any sense. Kasi ganito yan. In the long run, every time there is profit to be made, there will be new entrants, no matter how small. Remember that when we calculate the cost, alright, lahat kasama na doon, including opportunity cost of time ng owner, opportunity cost of nung capital na ininvest niya, yung financial capital niya, no? Yung return on investment nakapaloob na yun sa cost as an opportunity cost of capital, alright, or return on capital na yon. So any other excess is what we call super profit, or may tawag din abnormal profit, parang hindi siya normal kasi in return a profit is no longer any profit is no longer not that it's not desired, pero it's not expected. Ibig sabihin, if the profit were zero, okay lang yun kasi all of the return on investment, etc., are already included in the cost. So, yung may-ari nung building, akin yung building, ako yung producer, akin din yung building, tapos yung cost ng yung ininvest ko, no, yung pera na ipinasok ko doon sa kumpanya, meron na siyang normal return. Remember yung mga pinakita ko sa inyo noon, may dividends, etc. Kasama na yan doon sa kumbaga parang return doon sa investment nung may-ari ng firm. So anything above that is what we call super profit or abnormal profit. As long as there is, tawagin na lang natin siyang profit kasi parang ang sagwa naman tingnan at pakinggan abnormal profit, no? So tawagin na lang natin siyang profit. Anything that's above all of the costs, not accounting costs but economic costs, all right, will attract new businesses. So every time a new business firm enters the market, supply will expand. And when supply expands, the price will go down. When the price goes down, the abnormal profit goes down as well. So in the long run, when all of the firms that can possibly make normal profit enters the industry, the economic profit will be driven down to zero because every time a new firm enters the market, the price of the good goes down kasi dumadami supply. So as a result, in the long run, there will be zero economic profit. But that doesn't mean that the owner of the firm isn't making money. He is kasi yung return on investments niya nakapaloob na sa cost, yung opportunity cost of his time na nakapaloob na rin sa cost. So all of those costs, sa accounting siguro, they're considered profit pa. Pero sa economics, simple return on opportunity cost na, or return on investments lang yon. So naka-envelope na naka-sandwich na siya dun sa cost. So kumita na yung may-ari nung pera na nag-invest dun sa production. Okay? Wala na lang siyang tinatawag na super profit or abnormal profit kasi hindi naman actually na kailangan for him to make money out of the investments he made. Alright? So in the long run, there will be zero economic profit and business will earn normal return on their investments as reflected in the return on their opportunity costs. Okay? So now there are different types of supply curve. This is just for completeness kasi since na-derive na natin ng supply curve. Remember itong derivation natin ng supply curve since we use the condition price is equal to marginal cost. All that we've talked about is based doon sa perfectly competitive firm. But this also applies doon sa imperfect competition. The difference is instead, the price is not equal to marginal revenue, but the condition marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is what we will use. No? Kasi later on, I'll show you what the difference is. Kasi kapag imperfect competition ka, ibig sabihin, hindi price taker yung firm. So ibig sabihin, he faces a downward sloping individual demand curve. Hindi katulad sa perfect competition, he faces a straight price line. So that's essentially a horizontal demand curve. Okay, so this is one type of supply curve. This is called the constant cost supply curve. Ibig sabihin, there's only one price. No? The firm is willing to take one price, and he will supply as much as he can based on that price. So the constant returns to scale, normally ito, big sabihin, every time the firm increases yung output niya, yung input niya, the output will increase by the same percentage or by the same amount. So in this case, it's a constant cost supply curve, and there's no need to ask for higher price because additional quantity will just cost the same. So i-expand lang niya yung quantity niya, it costs the same. Ni katulad kasi kapag increasing kapag non-constant returns to scale, yung marginal cost niya is yung supply curve mo is upward sloping na. No? Anyway, so ito kapag constant returns to scale, mag-expand ka na, gusto mo mag-expand ng quantity, expand mo lang lahat ng yung inputs, but since they balance out, no, kung 1% ang in-increase mo ng lahat ng inputs mo, 1% din ang increase ng quantity mo, then your cost is essentially the same. The average cost is essentially the same. Not the total cost. Syempre, total cost will rise kasi you have more quantity. But the average cost is the same. And when we're doing costing, remember yung graph natin, it's the average cost that we're looking at. Okay? So even though the total cost is expanding because the amount of quantity of produced is expanding, the per unit cost is the same. So there's no need for the firm to ask for higher price because each quantity, each unit of the good costs the same. Diba? Hindi katulad kapag upward sloping yung o kapag decreasing returns yan, or kapag upward sloping yung cost curve mo, then hindi pare-pareho ang per unit cost of production. Okay. So ito naman, this is the normal supply curve. This is increasing costs, no? Katulad ng binanggit ko kanina. This is diminishing return. So in this case, higher price is needed to produce more because additional quantity produced will cost more. An additional unit of quantity produced will cost more. So this is a little bit confusing for some students kasi ang intindi ng iba, every time you increase production, you simply the cost of production will rise constantly. No, ibig sabihin not the cost of production will have a constant cost. Hindi yun totoo sa totoong buhay. All right? It's only in a situation where you have a constant returns to scale or constant cost situation that you will have that situation na kapag yung first, second, and third units mo pare-pareho ng per unit cost. In a normal situation, you have increasing cost because of diminishing marginal returns. No? Kaya ang cost of production rises at an increasing rate kapag a normal supply curve. So in this case, a normal supply curve is upward sloping, which is why the firm wants higher price in order to be enticed to produce more. Okay? Ito naman is when this is a vertical supply curve. This is a situation wherein the supply is independent of price. This is where there is only one quantity. When quantity supplied is fixed, the payment is called rent or pure economic rent. Increase in demand only results in higher price, no change in Q, and in this case, tax is fully absorbed by supplier. Ito naman yung sa tax incidence. Pero kaya sinasabing that in a situation wherein when the quantity supplied is fixed, no? So there's only one supply. Kahit ano pang price niyan, hindi na magtataas yung supply kasi there's only one supply, one quantity. So kapag meron kang downward sloping demand curve, demand curve mo yan, tapos dumami yung may gusto nun, so nag-shift. Kasi yumaman yung mga users, no? So tumaas yan, naging demand to, mapapansin nyo, quantity is the same, but it's only the price that rose. Diba? So itong P1 naging P2, tumaas yung price. Ang example nito ay yung mga artwork. Halimbawa, may isang Monet o may isang Amor Solo. Yung isang painting lang yan, that's fixed and supply. So kapag ka dumadami yung may gusto doon sa painting na yon, mapapansin nyo, tumataas lang yung presyo. Pero iisa pa din Amor Solo. Hindi na madadagdagan yun, patay na si Amor Solo. No? So fixed and supply na yan. Ito din yung similar sa talent, no? Yung halimbawa let's say yung bayad sa mga superstar, mga singers, no? Iisa lang ang supply, isa lang ang Regine Velasquez, isa lang ang Bruno Mars or whoever, no? So, kapag dumadami ang kanilang fans, kaya naman 'di ba, kaya sila project ng project, kaya sila market ng sarili nila in order to increase the fans. So pag dumami ang fans, then dadami yung demand essentially, and then they can command a higher price. Okay? So itong fixed supply or a vertical supply curve explains why talent, quality of voice, even yung mga basketball, have you ever asked yourself bakit ang taas-taas ng sweldo ng mga basketball players? Nagba-basketball lang naman sila, di ba? Parang sana hindi na lang tayo nag-aral. Kaya lang, talent kasi yon. So pinapanood sila ng mga tao habang natutuwa sila, magti-TikTok sila, kaya malakas ang yung push for yung mga Instagram, etc. It's to market themselves and make themselves more unique and increase their following. Kasi by making themselves more unique, diba, meron lang silang certain style, meron ka certain look. Diba? Yung mga influencers, may certain mukha lang yan. So sila lang ang may mukha na ganun. So, kaya nga like and subscribe, kasi pag dumadami ang like and subscribe nila o mga subscribers nila, then tumataas lang yung demand curve, tumataas yung kanilang price. So tumataas yung what they can charge. Okay? Alright, so ito naman is another type of, this is an application of the supply curve concept. Okay, so you have you have a horizontal supply curve, you have the normal supply curve, you have the vertical supply curve. Now you have a unique supply curve. It's called the backward bending supply curve. This is normally associated with labor supply. And the shape is positive first, and at some point the curve becomes negative. Ganyan ang itsura niya. It's a backward bending supply curve. Now, as I said, this is associated with the supply curve for labor. Ang tanong is, bakit siya backward bending? Kasi, ang explanation dyan ay, in the beginning, as you increase wage, kasi tayo, suppliers of labor tayo, di ba? Tayo ang owner ng, ng labor hours natin. No? So, kumbaga, para isipin niyo yung sarili niyo as you're a machine for labor hours. So, ibig sabihin yung if the price is higher, if the wage rate is higher, you want to work more. Diba? Natural yon kasi gusto mo pang kumita. But at some point, sinasabi ng theory ng backward bending supply curve or sa labor theory, the wage, which is the price of labor, may be so high that any additional increase in wage or salary or payment is going to entice the person to work less. Why? Because the payment is so high, the person now thinks it can engage or it can use its hours for fun. Sabihin, in the beginning, all right, ang total labor hours kasi for any person, total hours of a person is equal to work hours plus leisure hours. All right. In the beginning, when the wage is still low, every time the wage increases, the person reduces leisure hours, reduces this, and increases this. Why? Because the opportunity cost of leisure goes up. Kasi if this person doesn't take advantage of the higher salary and instead engages in leisure, nagbakasyon siya, imbis na nagtrabaho siya, then he loses out. No? Let's say, ang sweldo mo dati, per hour ka halimbawa, ang sweldo mo is 1,000 per hour ka. So 1,000 per hour, you're willing to work, let's say, 8 hours, dami nun. Say 1,000 per hour, siguro you're willing to work 8 hours a day. So 8,000 a day ka, laki nun, ano? Dita natin, 500 ka lang per hour. Masyado namang malaki 8,000 pesos kasi kung ano man yun, di pumasok na ako doon. 500, so that means 4,000 a day ka. Okay, so 4,000 a day. So, you work. Hindi ka magbabakasyon kasi sayang yung for every hour na nagbakasyon ka or engage in leisure, ba, nanood kang sine, for every hour na nanood ka ng sine, that means 500 pesos worth ng trabaho forgone. So kung nanood ka ng sine, ang opportunity cost nung panonood mo ng sine is yung cost ng sine plus 500 pesos per hour. Now, kung tumaas ang sweldo mo to 1,000, so from 500 naging 1,000 per hour na yan, then lalong magmamahal ang sine. Kumbaga, no? Parang lalong nagmamahal ang leisure. So ngayon, sabi mo, ay hindi lang ako manonood ng sine, magtatrabaho na lang ako kasi sayang yung pera. No? Ngayon, dahil habang tumataas yung sweldo, tumataas yung price ng labor, you want to work more. Ngayon nagtatrabaho ka almost 12 hours a day na kasi taking advantage ka of the price of the high salary. No? Kasi ang sweldo mo na ngayon is something like 5,000 per hour. No, so sabi, sayang. So, trabaho ka, 12 hours ka na nagtatrabaho. Pagod ka na. Kasi 12 hours ka na nagtatrabaho. So, nangyayari na lang sa'yo, nagtatrabaho ka na lang at natutulog or kumakain. Maaaring ang kulang ka na sa tulog kasi gusto mo pang magtrabaho. Kapag ka tumaas pa yung sweldo mo to 20,000 per hour, you will think now, yung tinatawag na income effect na, you'll think, dami ko ng pera, no? Siguro naman pwede na ako magbakasyon. So kung tumaas pa yung 20,000 na yan, sasabihin ko, yung desired salary ko, yung desired income ko, naabot ko na. So kung tumataas pa yung per hour mo, lagpas na dun sa desired income mo, you will now reduce your number of hours kasi hanggang dun sa desired income mo, and you will now start having fun. And you will now start to spend spend on vacation, probably spend time with your family. Kasi now the opportunity cost of working is so high kasi you're foregoing so much as a result of working too many hours. That's why the supply curve is backward bending. Kasi at that point, when the salary is so high, that the opportunity cost of leisure now, kasi ang dami mo ng oras na binibigay na sa trabaho lang, now the opportunity cost of leisure is very low. The opportunity cost of working is high. Kasi you'd like to bring back your health to specifically your mental health to how it was before. So you'll spend more vacation hours, more vacation time. As a result, the supply curve for labor is backward bending. Okay? All right. So now let's talk about, so that's the supply curve. Now let's just talk about quickly itong sa Pareto efficiency, which is this concept of allocative efficiency or yung state of rest or state of happiness na those that are involved in productive endeavor or productive or economic activities. So efficiency is described in terms of Pareto efficiency or allocative efficiency. This is associated with the term Pareto optimality or Pareto efficiency. Pag sinabing Pareto, sukdulan ito. Actually, this is named after a scholar, no? I forget his first name, but his last name was Pareto. So, siya ang unang nakaisip nitong idea ng Pareto optimality. Now, what is it? It is a situation wherein no possible reorganization of production or distribution can make anyone better off without making another entity worse off. So when full efficiency or complete efficiency is attained, it is the point wherein we have reached Pareto efficiency or Pareto optimality. It is a state wherein you can no longer make one happier than before without taking some happiness away from another. It is a state of rest. It is a state of optimal or equilibrium condition or Pareto equilibrium, Pareto optimality. Na kapag the only way you can make one person better off is by making another person worse off. That's called Pareto efficiency. Yung yung sitwasyon na kung saan everyone has attained his or her optimal happiness or optimal utility or optimal profit, that the only way you can increase the happiness of another is at the expense of another. Or yet the only way you can increase the profit of a firm is by decreasing the profit of another firm. Okay? This is called Pareto. Pagka naabot natin yon, tinatawag natin we are at a Pareto optimal condition, optimal position or Pareto efficient position. Okay. Under assumptions, sinasabi sa theory kasi ng perfectly competitive equilibrium, under assumptions of perfectly competitive markets with no externalities, competitive equilibrium is deemed Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient. Ito ang pagkakaiba ng perfect competition or perfectly competitive equilibrium sa imperfectly competitive equilibrium. Because in a perfectly competitive situation, when you reach equilibrium, you reach Pareto optimality. Hindi ito pareho sa imperfect competition. That's one thing. No? So perfect competition results in efficiency and results in Pareto optimality. Okay? So that's why separate ang pag-aaral sa perfect competition, because automatic, according to theory, when you reach perfectly competitive equilibrium, you've also reached Pareto optimality or Pareto efficiency. So, but problem is often the world is not competitive equilibrium or is not in a competitive equilibrium state, because when there is market failure, we can't reach or we can't attain competitive equilibrium. So why would the market fail? Ito yung mga situations wherein the market will fail. There's presence of market power that results in perfect competition. There's presence of externalities, and there's imperfect information, all of which happen in the real world. So often it is when there is often the world is imperfect, so the market is imperfect. Often there is some market power because due to sometimes political influence, sometimes access to inputs. No, isang firm, siya lang ang may alam dun sa inputs na yon, o siya lang ang may access. Sometimes because of pollution, because of yung mga externalities, or that some entities within the market know more than the others, then you're going to have a market failure. And therefore, by nature, parang Pareto optimality or perfect competition, perfectly competitive equilibrium, isn't normally reached, but although it is the gold standard, no, all economies try to attain perfect competition or perfectly competitive equilibrium, because the idea is if you do, then you also have Pareto optimality, which is already the state of rest. That is what societies want, no, Pareto optimality. So kaya lang in the real world, reaching perfect competition, perfectly competitive equilibrium is very difficult because of the presence of conditions of market failure na katulad nitong nakalista dito. So it is when there's cause for market failure that the government steps in to correct the imperfection. This highlights the role of government, because the government should be constantly trying to correct the imperfections in order to move the economy and society closer to perfectly competitive situation and therefore Pareto efficiency. Yun ang role ng government, kaya vote wisely. Kasi government should be aware of this. That's why if there's corruption in government, ibig sabihin nauuna yung individual na pagnanasa ng mga namumuno kesa doon sa social welfare, then the government fails to fulfill its mandate as the one that's correcting for market imperfection. In some cases, members of government adds to market imperfection, by favoring firms, by favoring entities, nepotism, etc., which reduces the conditions, or which eliminates conditions, some conditions for perfect competition. So one of the main functions of government is to fix market failures. Kasi importante talaga na ang gobyerno mo matino. Kasi kung hindi, then we will always have those market imperfections, and we're getting farther and farther away from reaching Pareto optimality, or from reaching perfect competition, or perfect or competitive equilibrium. Diba? We may never attain perfectly competitive situation or competitive equilibrium, but by trying to get there, we are increasing welfare. Just the fact that we're getting closer to that, even though sometimes it's a moving target, no? But getting closer and closer to competitive equilibrium means that the welfare of society rises as we get closer. The farther we get away from, or we go farther from competitive equilibrium or from Pareto optimality, then according to theory, the welfare of society declines. So kaya government is supposed to correct for those market failures. So now, some notes about making assessments based on price alone. We must be cognizant that often in the real world, prices do not reflect the true cost incurred by society to have the good produced. This is because of the presence of externalities. All right, so prices do not, in the real world, the prices that you pay for are actually understated. Sometimes you should be paying more, because if we are to add the cost of pollution, the cost of harm, the cost of destruction, the price that you're paying should be higher. Now, consider an example: a water pipe produced in the Philippines and in China. The pipe from the Philippines may be more expensive because it uses biodegradable carbon-based material. The pipe from China may be cheaper because it's made of lead, and it's cheaper to use lead. No? Now, if decisions were based on price alone, then faulty decision making might happen. So anong mangyayari dito sa case ng China? Then it is the pipe from China that will be bought because it's cheaper. So people don't care about anything else. It's mostly people react to prices only. It's especially Filipinos. No, most Filipinos act on price alone, and that can be explained by the fact that very low income. There's a lot of poverty in the country. So if something is cheaper, it will be patronized. But the material that's used for that cheaper product may be deadly. It may have a lot of externalities. So as a result, the pipe from China may be patronized, it'll be bought because it uses lead. And lead is toxic to health. As a result, so if you use lead pipe, halimbawa, some lead may rub off in the water that passes through the pipes, so it might be toxic to your health. But the pipe was cheaper, so when you had your water pipe system constructed, it will be cheaper because lead pipe is cheaper. But because the cost of harm of lead isn't reflected in the price of lead. Okay, so if decisions were based on price alone, then faulty decision making might happen. So that's the theory of the firm. That's the end of chapter 8. Okay, so before we proceed to chapter 9, quickly, is there any question? Wala? Okay, then let's proceed to chapter 9. Chapter 9 naman is that there is now we're going to it's an analysis of the other side of the coin, which is imperfect competition. So this is the analysis of imperfectly competitive markets. Okay, all right. So konting review from perfect competition. The perfect competitive situation, or perfectly competitive economic structure, is an idealized type of market organization. It's ideal. In most cases, perfect competition isn't possible just because of the failures of the market, some of which are intrinsic to the situation, because of externalities, or imbalance in market power. Some firms have influence over the price kasi they have influence over government, etc. So perfect competition is difficult to attain because most markets are dominated by a handful of firms in the real world. So for perfect competition to happen, there should be many firms. There should be the market access should be costless. Ibig sabihin, any firm that likes to produce that has the technology, etc., should have access to the market. But sometimes the transaction costs are so high that it prevents especially smaller firms to participate. That by itself is a market imperfection, because especially if the transaction cost, no, yung mga cost of doing business is so expensive. If you're a small firm, you won't participate because the cost of investment might be too high for you. Kasi ang mahal ng makideal sa government kung minsan. Kaya we'd like the cost of transactions or the cost of doing business to go down as well, so that more people can participate, more firms can participate. So in most cases, there's a certain degree of imperfection in the market in the real world. Okay. Now, what is imperfect competition? This is the direct opposite of perfect competition. This is the type of market organization wherein at least one individual seller can affect the price of a good or output. The market control is not necessarily full or complete, but at least some degree. So hindi kailangang one firm has complete control over the price. Kung meron lang siyang influence, maaaring in terms of size, maaaring hindi lang dahil sa corruption, maaaring by nature kasi malaki siya, malaking firm siya. So kapag dahil malaking or meron siyang decreasing cost, returns to scale, halimbawa as a result of its size. Kasi remember that the characteristics of a firm could affect the returns to scale situation of the firm, no? So maaaring pagka sa sobrang laki ng firm, it will actually experience decreasing decreasing returns to scale, or sorry, decreasing cost, not decreasing returns, increasing returns to scale, which will result in decreasing cost. So yung average cost niya will go down. As a result, the other firms can't compete. The smaller firms cannot compete. Wala namang corruption doon. It's just that the size of the firm is just, the firm is just too large. So as a result, the big firm may have some influence over the price. Now, the general comment about imperfect competition versus perfect competition is that the price of a good is generally higher under imperfect competition than perfect competition. As a result, no, kasi perfect competition, the lowest price possible na yan eh. Kasi, di ba, firms that will have extraordinary profit will attract more firms. So, pababa yung price kasi lumalaki yung supply. So, the lowest possible price for that good occurs under perfect competition. Under imperfect competition, because there are only a few firms involved. So, the other firms are excluded or can't enter the market, can't compete. So because there are only a few firms, then whatever one firm does in terms of production will have an impact on the industry. Unlike under perfect competition, every individual firm, the action of an individual firm does not affect the industry. So as a result, also output is less under imperfect competition than in perfect competition. Now, imperfect competition is the dominant market organization in the real world. So there is some sort of market influence, but the market influence varies from industry to industry. This is not imperfect competition isn't necessarily because of corruption. Sometimes it's just the nature of things that there is imperfect, for instance, there's pollution. Kaya nga the government is supposed to be effective in that sense, to continuously go after firms that have undue influence over the price or over cost. But in some situations, imperfect competition becomes the norm, especially for situations like utilities, yung ang production nila ay yung water, power, etc. No? Cable, di ba kukonti lang naman ng suppliers ng, halimbawa, Netflix. Sino pa bang kalaban ng Netflix? Wala naman na yata. Amazon Prime yata. Dalawa lang sila. So, mangyayari, kapag nagbaba ng presyo ang Netflix, magbababa din ng presyo ang Amazon in order to compete. Yun ang ibig ko sabihin ng may influence yung firm sa price. Kasi pag nagbaba ng presyo ang Netflix, magbababa din ng presyo ang Amazon. Ganun din ang Globe, halimbawa. Pag nagbaba ng presyo ang Globe, magbababa ng presyo ang Smart. So may impact yung action ng isang firm sa price That's imperfect competition. Hindi katulad sa perfect competition. Halimbawa, yung nagtitinda ng t-shirt, more or less close to perfect competition yan eh. So, assuming pare-pareho yung quality ng t-shirts, pag nagbaba ng presyo yung isang tindahan, let's say sa UP, ng presyo ng t-shirt, hindi naman yan magta-translate into the average price of t-shirts going down because the action of one t-shirt maker isn't going to impact the industry or not necessarily impact the industry. All right? Unlike sa imperfect competition, no? Kasi kokonti lang sila. Okay, so yan ang example ng imperfect competition o situations ng imperfect competition. Maski sa computer, ganun eh. Essentially, pag nagbaba ng presyo, di ba, pare-pareho sa halimbawang PC-based, alright, or sa phones, ba Android, well, hindi, ang phones kasi may product differentiated yan. Hindi naman talaga exactly the same yung mga phones kasi iba-iba yung klase ng camera, etc. Pero for goods that are very close or close substitutes like cable or phone service, pagka nagbaba ng presyo ang PLDT, malamang magpababa din ng presyo ang Globe. That's imperfect competition. So some industries under competition or close to perfect competition would be agricultural products such as rice, corn, or agricultural produce. Kasi ang daming producers ng rice, ang daming producers ng corn, daming producers ng mga gulay, no? Except for some specialty vegetables na kung saan let's say pinoproduce lang sa Baguio, pinoproduce lang sa kung saang probinsya. But generally, ang gulay ay close to perfect competition. Okay? Types of imperfect competition, ito yung pag-aaralan natin isa-isa, no? So there's a monopoly, there's oligopoly, and then there's monopolistic competition. Pag sinabing monopoly, there's only one producer or of a good in the market. So monopoly is not common because of government regulations. Government regulations, governments in general in the world, all over the world, go after monopolies because monopolies is the extreme case of imperfect competition. Recall that the government is mandated to try to bring the market as close as possible to perfect competition or competitive equilibrium. So monopoly is something that's frowned upon by all economies. So it's not very common. Sometimes there are natural monopolies. Wala talagang ibang magpo-produce, sila lang. So walang choice. But the government tries to entice other firms to enter the market. Kasi kung recall that under perfectly competitive type of industrial organization, the price is at its lowest. Every time there's imperfect competition, the price is higher. Since the extreme case of imperfect competition is monopoly, the price of the good is highest when there is monopoly. So monopoly is characterized by only one producer of a good in the market. Okay, so reasons for a monopoly situation, sometimes there is an existence to barrier to entry. No, merong pumipigil sa entry sa market, and this is not necessarily something na corruption agad. No, maaari nga kasi yung investment, no? Halimbawa, yung investment to participate is so high. Halimbawa, mining for instance, no? Well, hindi naman monopoly ang mining, pero kung halimbawa ang cost to operate or cost to invest is so high, kaunti o isa lang firm ang maaaring maka-afford or interested, then that's a barrier to entry. No? Sometimes it's what do you call this? Sometimes sometimes it's corruption talaga. No? Kung hindi maraming requirements na only special firms or favored firms can fulfill the requirements of government to enter the market. That could be a reason for monopoly situation. Or the market may be too small. So remember that every time a producer or a firm enters the market, bababa yung price. If the market is too small, ibig sabihin demand is small, then it doesn't make sense to have a lot of producers. Kasi bababa yung price to a point na hindi kayang i-cover yung cost of production ng firm, they will leave the market. So when they continuously leave the market, baka isa lang ang matira, the one that has that can withstand the low price, baka meron siyang paraan para yung kanyang cost of production is lower than the others. So sometimes monopoly is because of a special privilege such as a patent. Ito hindi patent. It's a patent or franchise. Nung umpisa, no, nung yung sa COVID, kaya nag-uunahan sila noon kasi gusto nilang magkaroon ng chance na sila muna yung monopolist, 'di ba? Ang unang-unang nagkaroon ng COVID na vaccine was Russia Sputnik. Sila yung unang-una minadali. Well, not sure, no? Effective naman daw ang Sputnik. But nevertheless, yung desire to be the first is, well, because this is emergency use, walang may patent. No? So, dahil sa COVID. Pero normally, kapag ka meron kang discovery, you get to enjoy a patent. No? For 50 years, ikaw lang ang allowed to produce that. After 50 years, nagiging open na yon. Pwede nang kopyahin yung, yung formula mo. But during the first 50 years, this is to encourage invention. No? So may patent ka, ikaw lang, monopolist ka, ikaw lang ang pwedeng mag-produce nun. So itong mga patents, normally sa gamot ito Sa gamot or sa mga inventions, mga bagong inventions. Now, note that no monopolist is secure in its position in the market unless there's corruption in government. Because as I said, constantly governments are trying to minimize yung monopoly situation. So there's always effort by government to open the market, reduce yung monopoly power, etc. So that's why monopolist is never secure in its position unless it can bribe government. Now, oligopoly, monopoly is just one seller. Oligopoly is few sellers. All right. So two sellers, especially known as duopolies. Pero three sellers or more, oligopoly na yan. Pero two sellers or more is still oligopoly. Special name lang yung duopoly or duopolist. So in an oligopoly, each firm can affect the price. Each oligopolist can affect the price. Examples of oligopoly in the Philippines are cellular phone service providers, cable services, internet services. So oligopoly tayo. Kasi let's say yung sa cellphone, Smart and Globe lang naman yan Diba? So that's obviously duopoly or a special type of oligopoly. Cable services, well, you have Sky, you have Globe, I think, may Signal, etc. Those are still few, no? If you can name them all, then they must be few sellers. What is few? Well, few by definition is just that they are few enough that the activity of one can affect price. Yun ang definition ng few. That just a few of them, kung sino man ang magbaba ng presyo, will affect the decision making of others and therefore will result in a change of price. So that's what we mean by few. Monopolistic competition, this is interesting among the three of them kasi this is characterized by a large number of sellers. So para siyang perfect competition kasi large number of sellers. Kaya lang, they're all selling differentiated products. They're essentially selling the same product, but there's a slight difference in the characteristic of the product, which makes it appear like it's the only one that this firm is producing that special good, no? But really, yung difference sa characteristic ng product is small. Like halimbawa, kulay lang. Superficial characteristics, no? Yung mga phones, halimbawa, differentiated products ng cellphones. Kasi the function is the same. All of them can allow you or will allow you to make calls and send text messages. But what's the difference? Why is, let's say, an iPhone different from a Samsung phone? Kasi yung daw color quality ng camera. Or pareho silang may camera pero may slight variation, mas malamig sa mata yung kulay ng pictures sa let's say iPhone, etc. Differentiated product yan kasi they're the same product, no? Soft drinks, differentiated products yan. Coke and Pepsi, etc. No? Pagka ininom mo yan, kung nakapikit ka actually, when I was in college, we did this all the time kasi we had too much time in our hands. No, magpapataste test kami naka-blindfold and we just wanted to see kung consistent ba, malalasahan mo ba yung difference ng taste ng Pepsi at Coke. And apparently, for some, malalasahan, but for many, hindi. So, it goes to show that they're essentially the same product, kaya lang through marketing, they seem to be different when actually they're not. So in most cases, the differentiation in a monopolistic competition, a differentiated products, is only perception, such as location of the good. Let's say, bangus na galing sa Dagupan versus bangus na galing sa, let's say, Tarlac, ganyan. Or mangga galing sa Zambales or sa Guimaras versus mangga galing sa Quezon. Now, marketing is one major contributor to product differentiation. So examples of monopolistic competition, gasoline, yan, Petron and Shell, pare-parehong gas yan. Pero somehow people still think that the gas that Petron sells is different from the gas that Shell sells. They're not, they're the same. Kaya lang because of marketing, they seem to be different when actually they're not. Schools sometimes. May difference nga ba ang UP at Ateneo? Well, medyo controversial yan. Kasi kung they're all centers for learning, pero iba daw ang quality ng UP students, Ateneo student, I don't know. But that's an example of monopolistic competition. Okay, so final note before I let you go, there's a difference between competition and rivalry. So I keep using the word competition when I refer to perfect competition. But when I talk about few firms, they're trying to outwit each other, trying to gain market, trying to gain a bigger portion of the market. It's called rivalry. So the market may be oligopolistic in nature, but there could still be price wars because of rivalry. And rivalry creates behavior to increase profit and market share. And rivalry could result from advertising, price cuts, and product improvement. All right? O sige. It's 11 o'clock, so I'll let you go. We'll continue this discussion on Thursday. Thank you so much. Let me just return to the screen. Okay. Kung may tanong, I'll quickly answer them. Kung wala, then you may leave. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.